Hey everyone! Before we dive into one of the most haunting and brutal true crime stories you will ever hear, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps this channel keep bringing you cases that will shake you to your core. And trust me, what you're about to learn about a canyon in western Colorado will stay with you for a long time. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready. Because 12 people walked into a canyon on a September morning in 1992. They had permits, itineraries, emergency contacts. They had done everything right. 8 days later, a ranger found them. All 12, all dead, spread across a quarter-mile of canyon floor. No witnesses, no phones, no way out. And the 3 men who did it went home, slept in their own beds, and showed up to hand out missing posters. This is Serpent Creek Canyon. This is what happened when the wilderness became a killing field. Let me take you to western Colorado, September 1992. Not the Colorado of ski resorts and mountain towns. This is the other Colorado, the high desert, where sandstone canyons cut through the Uncompahgre Plateau like wounds in the earth. The silence here goes on for miles. The wind carries only the smell of juniper and dry earth. By 1992, this region had been in economic collapse for over a decade. The uranium boom that had built these tiny towns was long gone. Naturita, once a bustling community of nearly 2,000 people, had shrunk to fewer than 600. Storefronts stood empty. Schools had been consolidated. Young people had left in search of work. Those who remained were either tied to land their families had worked for generations, or they were people who simply preferred to disappear. Serpent Creek Canyon sat 14 miles from the nearest maintained trail. Sandstone walls rose 300 feet above the creek bed, forming a natural amphitheater that trapped sound and light. Cottonwood thickets were so dense that you could be 20 yards from another person and never know they were there. The creek itself was shallow, winding, its pools reflecting the sky in fragments. Sound bounced off the rock walls in strange ways. A whisper could echo like a shout, and a shout could vanish into nothing. It was the kind of place where things could happen, and no one would ever hear them. By the fall of 1992, someone knew that. Someone had already chosen this canyon as a meeting point for a drug transaction that would go disastrously wrong. And 3 men, desperate, frightened, and armed, were about to make a decision that would end 12 innocent lives. Let me introduce you to them. Russell James Vickers was 34 years old. He was the eldest son of a ranching family that had worked the same 200 acres outside Naturita since the 1940s. As a young man, Russell had been a good student, a football player, someone who followed a conventional path. He married, had a daughter, and expected to inherit the family ranch and live out his days on the land he loved. But the mid-1980s brought a collapse in the ranching economy. Foreclosures swept the region like a wildfire. The Vickers family lost their land in 1987. Russell's father, a proud and stubborn man, couldn't accept it. Less than a year later, he died by suicide. Russell was left with debt, a family to support, and a burning resentment that he tried to bury under hard work. By 1992, he was still accumulating debt. He owed more than $8,000, a sum that might not sound huge today, but for a man with no steady income and a wife and daughter depending on him, it was a mountain he couldn't climb. He was facing eviction. His younger brother, Curtis Vickers, was 29. Where Russell was quiet and methodical, Curtis was volatile. He had fallen into methamphetamine use, and the drug had twisted his mind into something paranoid and quick to anger. He lived in a trailer outside town, barely holding on to his truck. He was fiercely loyal to Russell, loyal to the point of recklessness. If Russell suggested something, Curtis would do it, no questions asked. That loyalty would prove to be a curse. The third man was Michael Hobart, 38 years old. He had known the Vickers brothers since childhood. He had no steady income, no family of his own. He lived in a camper on a cousin's property, drifting from odd job to odd job. He was the one who always seemed to know where money could be found, often on the wrong side of the law. By the summer of 1992, all 3 were drowning. Russell owed more than $8,000. Curtis was about to lose his truck. Hobart had been given a deadline to start paying rent or get out. They were desperate, and desperate people make terrible choices. That's when the offer came. A contact in Cortez, a mid-level drug distributor named Eduardo Salinas, needed someone to pick up a shipment in the backcountry. Methamphetamine and cocaine enough to fill a duffel bag. The plan was simple. drive to a remote location, meet a courier, collect the drugs, and transport them north to Grand Junction. The pay was $15,000, more than Russell could make in 6 months of honest work. A single trip, Curtis said. No violence. No direct contact with anyone dangerous. Russell had misgivings. He knew what this was. He knew the risks, but he also knew that his family depended on him. He agreed. On the evening of September 10, 1992, the three men loaded Russell's truck, a 1984 Chevrolet K10 with a camper shell with 3 firearms, a hunting rifle, a shotgun, and a 9mm pistol. They brought a CB radio, topographic maps, and written instructions from Salinas. The meeting point was an abandoned mining camp at the head of Serpent Creek Canyon. The courier was supposed to arrive at noon on September 12th. They drove out into the fading light, set up camp in a clearing, built a fire, and waited. They had no idea that 12 other people were already descending into that same canyon. The first group of hikers was 7 experienced outdoors enthusiasts from Boulder. They included 2 married couples and 3 others, ranging in age from 27 to 41. They were experienced, prepared, and had filed permits with the Forest Service. They had maps, emergency supplies, and a satellite emergency device. The second group was 5 college students from Fort Collins, ages 19 to 23. They were on their last trip before the fall semester. Less experienced, maybe, but fit, enthusiastic, and ready for adventure. The 2 groups met at a trail junction on the morning of September 11th. They compared maps and realized they were heading the same direction. Thomas Aldridge, an engineer from Boulder, a man described by his friends as calm and thoughtful, suggested they travel together for safety and companionship. Everyone agreed. By mid-afternoon on September 11th, all 12 hikers had descended into Serpent Creek Canyon. They made camp near a series of creek pools, about 3 miles downstream from where Russell, Curtis, and Hobart were waiting. The hikers had no idea anyone else was there. That evening, one of the hikers, Rebecca Haynes, wrote in her journal, "This place feels timeless. No sound but wind and water. Hard to believe we're only a few hours from civilization." She would be dead in less than 24 hours. September 12th, noon. The courier didn't arrive. Russell tried the CB radio. No response. Hobart said to wait another hour. Curtis wanted to leave. His paranoia was already simmering. Russell waited. By mid-afternoon, it was clear that no one was coming. Russell tried the radio again. This time, someone answered not Salinas, but a voice he didn't recognize. The man called himself Marco. He told Russell that the courier had been stopped at a checkpoint near Dove Creek. The shipment had been seized. Marco's voice was cold, emotionless. He said Salinas held Russell and his crew responsible for the loss. They now owed $40,000. They had 2 weeks to pay. Then the transmission ended. Curtis said it out loud. "We're done." For 2 hours, the 3 men sat in that clearing, trying to find a way out of a situation with no exit. They couldn't run. Russell had a wife and daughter. They couldn't pay. $40,000 in 2 weeks was impossible. They couldn't go to the police. They had already confessed to participating in a drug operation. They were trapped. At around 4:30 p.m., Curtis heard voices. He froze, moved back to the camp, and told Russell and Hobart. All 3 grabbed their weapons and went to the edge of the clearing to look. Through the trees, they saw 12 hikers moving up the canyon, talking, laughing, completely unaware of anything. The logical move was to stay hidden and let them pass. But Hobart, whose paranoia had been building all day, said something that changed everything. He suggested that the hikers might not be hikers at all. He said they could be scouts sent by Salinas to watch them. The timing, he said, was suspicious. They were coming from the exact direction that the courier should have come from. Curtis initially dismissed it, but Hobart kept pushing. And then Russell, exhausted and frightened, raised another concern. If the hikers saw their truck, their camp, and later reported it to the sheriff, it could tie them to the failed drug operation. Even if the hikers were innocent, their presence was a risk. The 3 men stayed hidden as the hikers drew closer. At approximately 5 p.m., 2 lead hikers entered the clearing. They stopped, looked around, and began discussing whether to camp there. Then they started to walk back toward the others. That's when Curtis Vickers made his decision. He stood, stepped into the clearing with his shotgun raised, and shouted for them to stop. Thomas Aldridge raised his hands immediately. Rebecca Haynes stepped backward. Curtis ordered them to the center of the clearing. Russell and Hobart emerged from the trees, all three armed, all three visible. Within minutes, all 12 hikers were gathered in front of them, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Russell spoke first. His voice was calmer than his brother's. He said they had entered a restricted area. He asked if they had seen anyone else, if they had radios. David Kern, one of the hikers, admitted that they had a satellite emergency device. Russell ordered them to hand it over. David complied, his hands shaking. For several minutes, it looked like it might end there. Frightened hikers, armed men, a tense standoff, but Russell even told them they could go. He said they had 60 seconds to take their packs and leave. It should have ended there. Then a 20-year-old college student named Emily Sanderson asked a single question. She asked if they could have their emergency device back. She explained that they were 3 days from the nearest road. If something went wrong, an injury, a medical emergency, they would have no way to call for help. Her voice was polite, not defiant, but Curtis interpreted it as defiance. He stepped forward and struck her across the face with the stock of his shotgun. She fell, bleeding from a gash above her eye. Jason Porter, another hiker, moved to help her. Curtis swung the weapon toward him. Thomas Aldridge, the engineer who had suggested the two groups travel together, shouted at Curtis to stop. He said they were unarmed, cooperative, no threat to anyone. He said violence was unnecessary. Curtis told him to shut up. Aldridge kept speaking. Curtis shot him. The blast echoed off the canyon walls. Aldridge collapsed, dead within seconds. The screaming started. Some hikers dropped to the ground. Some ran. Hobart, now convinced that they were under attack, raised his pistol. And that was it. The threshold was crossed. What followed was not a coordinated execution. It was a collapse, 40 minutes of chaos and gunfire in a canyon where sound had nowhere to go. Rebecca Haynes was shot while kneeling over Aldridge's body. Jason Porter was shot trying to help Emily Sanderson. Brian Castillo was hit while crawling toward the tree line. Michael Torres was shot in the back 30 yards from the clearing. Anna Delacqua, a teacher from Boulder, pleaded. She said she had children. She said her family didn't know where she was. She would do anything. Curtis looked at her for a long moment, then shot her in the chest. Sarah Lynn was 19 years old. She had hidden behind one of the collapsed mining structures, pressing her hands against her mouth to stay quiet. Hobart found her, called out to Curtis. Curtis walked over, looked down, and fired. She was the last. 40 minutes. 12 people. None armed. None given a real chance to run. Russell Vickers stood at the edge of the clearing through most of it. He didn't fire his rifle. He also didn't stop them. When it was over, Curtis was the first to speak. He said they needed to hide the bodies. For the next 3 hours, as daylight faded, the three men dragged 12 people into the brush, covered them with branches and rock, and piled all the gear into the truck. They attempted to clean blood from the sandstone, but the sandstone absorbed it. The volume was too great. They drove out of the canyon after 9 p.m. They disposed of the hikers' gear in a ravine off the highway. They smashed the satellite emergency device and threw it in a separate location. Russell arrived home at 2 a.m. His wife, Linda, asked where he'd been. He said camping with Curtis and Hobart. She asked if everything was all right. He said it was. He went to bed and slept for 14 hours. September 19, 1992, 7 days later. Forest Service Ranger David Kalchak was doing a routine inspection of trail conditions after recent storm damage. Serpent Creek Canyon wasn't on his primary route, but he decided to detour to check for erosion along the drainage. At 3:30 in the afternoon, he noticed a smell, faint but unmistakable. He followed it. He found brush and rocks arranged over a low depression. He pulled some aside and found Sarah Lynn. Within hours, the full scope became clear. 12 bodies, spread across a quarter-mile of canyon floor, all showing signs of gunshot trauma, all partially concealed, none carrying identification. The investigation landed with Detective Lieutenant Mark Hensley, a man who had worked homicides for 15 years and thought he had seen everything. He hadn't. By September 21st, all 12 victims had been identified through dental records. Families were notified. The media, which had been covering the story as a possible hiking accident, now understood they were looking at a mass homicide. The breakthrough came on September 28th. A rancher named Carl Jensen called the sheriff's office. He said he had seen a Chevrolet K10 with a camper shell driving out of County Road 90.7 fast. In the dark, on the night of September 12th, he recognized the truck. It belonged to Russell Vickers, a man he knew from town. All three men were brought in for questioning on September 30th. All three denied everything. They claimed they had been camping near Disappointment Creek, 50 miles away. Hensley got search warrants. Inside Russell's truck, investigators found blood DNA that matched 3 of the victims. They found fibers from the hikers' backpacks. In Curtis's trailer, they found a 12-gauge shotgun with ammunition matching casings from the scene. In Hobart's camper, they found the 9mm pistol, same match. October 4th, 1992. All 3 were arrested. 12 counts of first-degree murder each. Hobart was the first to talk. He described the failed drug transaction, the paranoia, the cascade of decisions that led to the killings. His account was self-serving. He tried to shift blame to Curtis, but it gave investigators the framework they needed. Russell asked to speak next, without his attorney present. His confession was detailed, raw, and emotionally devastating. He described watching his brother shoot Thomas Aldridge as the moment everything changed. He described standing at the edge of the clearing, paralyzed, unable to stop what was happening. He said he didn't understand how it had happened. He said he still doesn't. All 3 men were tried separately. All 3 were convicted on all 12 counts. Michael Hobart received life without parole, 12 consecutive sentences. He died in prison in 2018 from liver disease. He was 64 years old. Curtis Vickers received the death penalty by lethal injection. He waived his remaining appeals in 2007. His final words were, "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for who I became." He was executed on August 14, 2007. He was 44 years old. Russell Vickers is still incarcerated. In a 2015 interview, he said, "I think about those people every day. I see their faces. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect understanding. I just want people to know it wasn't supposed to happen. None of it was supposed to happen." In 2002, a small memorial plaque was installed in Serpent Creek Canyon. It bears 12 names and a single line, "In memory of those who came here seeking peace and found tragedy instead. Thomas Aldridge, Rebecca Haynes, Jason Porter, Sarah Lynn, David Kern, Brian Castillo, Michael Torres, Anna Delacqua, Emily Sanderson, Jennifer Callahan, Christopher Young, Patrick Morrison. They had done nothing wrong. They had filed their permits. They had told someone where they were going. They had been careful. They were simply in the wrong canyon on the wrong afternoon, within earshot of 3 men who had run out of options and made the worst decision of their lives, and the worst decision of 12 other people's lives. What happened in that canyon still doesn't fully make sense. 12 people, 40 minutes, 3 men who weren't killers until the moment they were. Thomas Aldridge spoke up when he could have stayed silent. Sarah Lynn hid when she had almost no chance left. They all made choices in those 40 minutes. We just never hear about theirs. We hear about the killers, their names, their backgrounds, their motivations. But the victims had names too. They had families, dreams, plans for the future. Rebecca Haynes was a painter. Jason Porter was studying to be a paramedic. Emily Sanderson wanted to be a teacher. Sarah Lynn had just started her sophomore year of college. They were real people, and they died because 3 desperate men let fear turn into murder. If you stayed until the end, it means something. This story is built from court transcripts, forensic reports, and archival documents that spent years in boxes before anyone thought they still mattered. The plaque in the canyon is small, easy to miss if you're not looking for it. But it's there. And the canyon itself is still there, the sandstone walls, the cottonwood thickets, the winding creek. The silence is still there. But if you listen closely, you might hear something else. Not voices, not ghosts, just the echo of a tragedy that should never have happened. Which moment in this story stayed with you? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if cases like this are what keep you coming back, make sure you're subscribed. Because some of these stories were buried for a reason. And the deeper you go into them, the less they feel like accidents. Thanks for watching. Sleep well, or don't.